Hey y'all, Austin here with Outer World Media. Welcome back to another book review, guys. This is going to be a book that's a little out there for me. What I'm going to say is, I'm a huge fan of history. I absolutely love history, learning about history, just all kinds of different stuff. Mostly about like war and stuff, like World War II, the Civil War, Roman, Greek, stuff like that. I'm very fascinated with the Battle of Cannae, between Hannibal and Rome and whatnot. But that being said, I want to branch out and get different, books about history and learn about different stuff. And this is a book that I knew was a movie, and I didn't realize that it was a book. I believe the movie stars Mel Gibson, if I'm not mistaken. I think I seen the movie trailer one time. For whatever reason, it got locked away somewhere in my mind, and I completely forgot about it until I went to my local library sale, saw this book. I was like, I think that's a movie. And I am talking about The Professor and the Madman. This is the A Tale of Murder, Insanity, in the Making of the Oxford English Dictionary. Um, Again, I saw this and I picked it up. It was like $1, and it's in like pristine condition. It's got the plastic wrap around there, so that very much intrigued me because it was kept and taken care of in a good way. And so I kind of read the blurb a little bit about this, and it sounded interesting to me. And so I figured, for $1, I'll pick it up. And I will say, I'm very happy that I did. This is one I didn't know fully going into it what to expect. I expected to, in my mind, I guess, this be the relationship mostly between, and I forget what their names are. Give me one second here. And I should have written this down. So you have Professor James Murray, as well as, and let me see here, William Chester Minor. So I expected this to mostly be about the relationship between the two and how they came to work on, the Oxford English Dictionary. And for whatever reason, and it's going to sound silly, I'm sure there's probably going to be people down in the comments that are going to make fun of me. For whatever reason, in my mind, I thought that this was going to be about these two guys who wrote the Oxford Dictionary or got it started a good, part of the way. And while that is kind of true what this book is about, I didn't fully comprehend, I guess, or realize just how much work and man hours and many people worked on the Oxford English Dictionary in the process of it coming to be, and how it kind of started off in different little variations until it finally culminated in them working on creating the Oxford English Dictionary. And yes, I'm going to warn you guys, I'm probably going to get a little tongue tied in this review because some of these words are a little hard to say. But again, kind of getting into it, we are introduced, and I'm sorry, I'm going to keep checking back here with this. So we are introduced to Professor James Murray. The story starts off with, James Murray going to meet Minor, and I'm just going to refer to him as Murray and Minor from now on, just so you guys know. So we have Murray, who is heading up this creating of the Oxford English Dictionary. And then we have Minor, who is like one of, if not the top contributor for this dictionary, just finding words and definitions and explaining and all that. So the story opens up with Murray going to meet Minor. And so he comes to this building, and it's explained that it's an asylum, in an insane asylum. And so Murray expects that Minor like works there and whatnot, and he's a little question as the story goes on. He kind of questions like, how does this guy have this much time? He must be retired. And then he realizes when he goes to meet Minor, hey, this is like an asylum. So he's thinking, oh, he must work here. He must be like in charge or something. So he goes in. He says, my name is James Murray. I believe that's the first name. Sorry, guys, I have to keep checking back to this. Yes, James Murray. And he goes, my name is James Murray. And he meets this fellow, and he goes, you must be, Dr. Minor. Or what is it? What is Minor's? Yes, Dr. Minor. Sorry, guys, I had to keep checking back to this. And the gentleman goes, no, I am not. My name is such and such. I run this asylum. Dr. Minor has been the longest resident that we've ever had here. And then from there, that's just kind of setting the, this question of what he's in an asylum. And then from there, the story opens up, kind of introducing us to Minor and Murray. Kind of explains how Minor came to be in the asylum and in the situation. It goes on to explain that Minor was a, very, very prestige soldier and whatnot, held him in high regard. His parents were evangelists on this island and whatnot, and how they sent him back to stay in America because they're over in this foreign land. And so he goes back to America and kind of talks about how, some of these issues that he's had that led up to him being in the asylum, kind of the seeds were planted being here, and how his parents were evangelists and whatnot, and how he had these impure thoughts and whatnot, and his parents came to realize this, and they wanted to send him away from that and get schooling and whatnot. And so he goes to stay with his uncle over in America, and all this takes place before the Civil War. Now, once, we get, Minor is over in America, kind of goes into him going to school. I believe it was to Yale. And then from there, he enlists to be, a soldier in the war during the Civil War, and how, he ends up, goes into this detailed story and just explanation about how they would have deserters during the Civil War. You would have on both sides. And so they would capture these deserters, and it talks specifically about this Irish fella that they capture, and they explain how whenever these deserters were captured, they had to be marked to show, hey, this person was a deserter, this person is whatever. And it goes to explain how, they would brand these people, or put something on there and make it very obvious to people, hey, this gentleman is a deserter. But the reason they would do this, it explains, is because you would have these Irish immigrants who would come over from Ireland over to America, learn how to fight in the war, and learn, these different tactics and whatnot. And then they would want to go back to Ireland, and if I'm not mistaken, they would want to, use what they learned, these tactics in the war over there in Ireland. I believe it was for the IRA, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken, and I could be wrong. Somebody correct me if that's the case. And so by branding these, deserters, they couldn't go back to Ireland, because this other group would know, hey, this guy came over to America to fight. He is a member of, I believe it's the IRA is what it's called. And so they couldn't go home, and he would have nothing to do. He was stuck in a foreign country that he didn't want to be in. And again, the author delves into this. And so from there, it puts, explains how they made Minor do this, where he branded this gentleman on like his forehead. Like he would take a brand and brand his forehead to show I think it was like a big D or something like that for deserter or something like that. And so that made Minor very, very paranoid, because when he did this to this gentleman, he would have to do it many, many times. And so in Minor's mind, as the cracks started to get bigger, he would think that these Irish immigrants would go tell these other, Irish people, hey, this specific guy, Minor, he branded me, he's against us, we need to get him, we need to kill him. And so that set the seeds in Minor's mind of, people are always after me. And that's a very important part, because as the war goes on and whatnot, Minor's transfer from different places, and he ends up, I believe, I think it's in Florida, if I'm not mistaken, or somewhere. He ends up somewhere at this fort where he ends up, his career's over. They realize, hey, he's not doing this. He's paranoid. And so they end up discharging him. And then from there, he tells friends and family, hey, I'm going to go over to Europe. I'm going to go take a year. I'm going to go paint. He's taking up painting and whatnot. I'm going to go do this. Just kind of clear my mind, get away from all this. I'm going to do this. And the military is still paying him. Well, so he ends up going over to Europe. And then from there, he ends up getting in this boarding house, if you will. And everybody that's kind of in this boarding house is realizing he's a nice guy, but he's crazy. He really is. And so we end up getting told about this gentleman, who, very hard worker, ends up shoveling coal in this terrible, terrible part of town. And, how he's just trying to provide for his family. Well, he wakes up one morning when it's still dark and goes off to work. Well, from there, he hears this gentleman chasing him. So he ends up running. Well, this he ends up getting shot. Well, Minor ends up shooting this person because Minor, while staying in this boarding house, he's in kind of this slum area of town, even though he's kind of a man of prestige, because there are women of the night there, and he can kind of do whatever he wants. He ends up catching a disease or two, if I'm not mistaken. And so he wakes up at night and just tells people, yeah, I have these people that are sneaking in and just doing crazy things to him. And so Minor ends up killing this guy. There are witnesses, and he ends up going to trial. And in this court and trial, they realize in his defenses he's crazy, and they end up saying, hey, and they prove it because they had many witnesses who say, yeah, this guy's crazy. So they end up putting him in an asylum. Well, when he gets to the asylum, he is kind of put in like this 2-cell block, the cushier unit of this asylum, and he ends up getting these 2-cell blocks, and he ends up having all this money. And so, he would get books come in, he would build bookshelves. He had somebody come in, organize and clean up after him. He had a very cushy, set couple cells in this asylum, kind of the rich person of this asylum. And while he's there, he ends up, communicating with the widow of the man that he killed, and he tries to help them, give them money, and he ends up kind of striking up a little bit of a friendship with the widow, and she agrees to bring him books, and save him on, shipping and all this, gets him a little quicker. Well, on one of the shipments of books, and it's very few shipments that she brings up because she ends up going on a downward spiral. One of the shipments of books that she brings in has this advertisement of, hey, we are trying to put together this. We need people to want to help. Mail here. It will let you know what you need to do. And Minor takes him up on that offer. And from there, we're introduced to Murray, who is trying to, conduct this. And it's a long story for Murray. It's interesting, but it's not as interesting, at least to me, as what Minor's story was and how he came to be and help with this. But essentially, Murray ends up getting Oxford College or University to agree to this. And so their idea, and I found this very, very interesting. I remember vividly being on the plane while trying to read a little bit of this and kind of leaning over to my wife saying, hey, listen to this. And it goes on to say, tell how Murray got this idea of, here's what we're going to do. And again, this is before the Civil War. Keep that in mind. So a lot of this started before Minor came over to Europe and whatnot. Well, he'd been there, but he ends up sending out this pamphlet or whatever, what have you, saying, and they end up saying, as they call it, the new country, to America, to the colonies is how they refer to it still. We need help, please, anybody that can help. And so they end up getting like hundreds or thousands of applicants to help, and they kind of send off. Well, from there, again, that's when Minor sends stuff in, and so they kind of don't think too much about it. And so from there, Minor starts to become the number one contributor for this project. And so, it goes on to tell about how they would, mail Minor, hey, we're trying to look for this. Can you help us with this? And Minor would graciously help and whatnot. And this is a very interesting story. Again, just because you see how these two men whose lives were completely different but came to have this friendship and this kind of bond and whatnot, this entire story is very interesting. And I am glossing over and skipping over points because I don't want to tell you too much about this book. I think everybody should read this book. Again, this is a very interesting story. To me, Minor is the most interesting character or person in this book. I say character. This is a nonfiction book. But again, this is very, very interesting to me. Just kind of reading about how this man who had such prestige and whatnot kind of had a downfall and end up helping with something that he doesn't get any recognition for. He really doesn't. And he's one of the top contributors for the Oxford English Dictionary. And this story really is about how, Murray and Minor came to, again, start up kind of a kinship, a friendship of some sorts and whatnot. We kind of just see how that all came to be. This is a very interesting book, not just because you get to hear and read about how the most prestigious dictionary of all time came to be, but you get to read this kind of biography of these two guys, specifically Minor, again, who's very, very intriguing to me. This is, like I said, at the beginning of this review, this is a book I would not necessarily see myself reading. But as the story goes on, you can't help but kind of be sucked into this story and be like, okay, I want to see what happens from this. Obviously, we know the Oxford English Dictionary came to be, but it's just very interesting to me, and this has made me want to watch the movie quite a bit. And again, I would stop and tell my wife, hey, this, little facts and tidbits. And I love my wife. She's not the biggest history fan, but she goes, this, you seem very, very entertained by this story and very intrigued, but this is not something that I would strike you to want to read. And the more I read this book, the more I realized I need to step outside my comfort zone and read other nonfiction books I normally wouldn't read, or that wouldn't strike me as something that would be interesting to me. Again, I really enjoyed this book. This is, I don't read much nonfiction, but this was a good book. This is definitely within the running for book of the month so far. But again, guys, I'm kind of rambling at this point. The Professor and the Madman. Should you pick this book up? Yes, I highly, highly recommend this book. I really, really enjoyed this book. This is a book and I say this quite often with books, but this is seriously one I see myself going back and rereading just because I enjoyed reading about Minor and it's unfortunate for his downfall and whatnot, but just kind of reading about it and just how he was in an asylum, but it was like a penthouse suite in an asylum is what he had, and how he had a library and he would just sit there and read for days, which for some people would be like, I don't want to be in an asylum, but you know what, if I could be in this 2-cell room with my own personal library and have nothing to do all day but read, like that sounds like heaven to me. And it sounds weird to say, but once you read this book, you're kind of like, okay, that sounds a little bit more, better than going to work and whatnot, being not cooped up in this room, but the ability to just sit there and read all day. And just the detail of how, they wanted the dictionary to be this, and how they realized, okay, well, there's been this other variation of this, and we need to be different. We need to be set aside. So we want the root word. We want sentences that explain how this word could be used and just help people. But again, guys, The Professor and the Madman, great, great read. I really enjoyed this. This was very much a quick read. There are, pictures in this book, which I found very interesting. I kind of like reading that. And each chapter, let me see if I can find it here. Each chapter kind of has a dictionary definition to start off. And again, as you read this, you feel sorry for Minor and the reason why he's there. But as the book goes on, and there's certain things that he did that happened, that you're like, he may be an older frail man, but he's still a danger, not only to himself, but possibly to society. There's a chapter in here where it talks about something that he does to himself, and just the way it's crazy, and it blows my mind that, again, even back then, people can still astound you. They may be considered legally insane, but they can still contribute to society, in this instance, in Minor's case, by helping with the Oxford Dictionary. But again, guys, highly, highly recommend this book. Pick it up. Again, I'm just a guy with a camera here, but I really, really enjoyed this one. As always, I hope you guys have a good one.